Yes, no, maybe so. Is this correct? That. What's the last thing you guys? Yeah, I think that might be the end of the last one. We'll double check. So we're way behind. Yeah, okay. All right, so here's the next one. That's all right, we'll finish it. Yeah, that was the end of the last slide. We're moving on. You have the last little word of the last slide. So this is the new slide. Continuing on. Yeah, let's continue writing. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
And this is what we're taking quiz on, right?
Correct. Well, no, actually, this was from last week's paper. I'm going to tell you when to start doing it with. Basically, it's the words that are now on. Right, so let's start. So, the event that officially begins the French Revolution is known as what? Yeah, Bastille. And so after that, one of the first things that's kicked out is feudalism. The Declaration of Rights of Man is written, which basically is their Bill of Rights. It's explaining what rights people have rights to. Eventually, this is going to incorporate all kinds of things like universal manhood suffrage. However, they're going to go through quite a few rewritings of their Constitution. One thing that's going to be constantly omitted are women's rights. Women are going to fight very hard during the Revolution to try to pass more equal measures for themselves, but really that's not going to happen. As we're going to see, women are going to have a much more difficult fight than simply acquiring what men have. It's going to be a long process. It's still going on, really. But regardless, this whole thing fits into this whole question of revolution. Now, Great Fear. The Great Fear is this period of time where basically everything's falling apart. You can imagine it this way. The government's gone. We're in this period of revolution. We're threatening war with every other nation in Europe. There's not enough food. The economy's in shambles. What are we going to do? People's lives are really bad. And the thing is, it's not that people totally, absolutely wanted to get rid of King Louis. It's just they wanted him to step up and be the leader that they wanted. Yes, they also wanted more freedoms. Yes, they wanted to rework the system, but they weren't trying to get rid of Louis, not yet. And I think this is best symbolized by the Red March. Basically, a group of women marched out of Paris to Versailles and forced Louis to come back into town. Basically, you got a group of angry women with kitchen knives and rolling pins, and especially baguettes, bread, symbolizing what they really wanted. They wanted peace and prosperity, and they wanted bread, a staple food item in France at the time. And they forced Louis to move back to Paris. The reason they thought that Louis was doing such a crappy job was because he was secluded. To some extent, they're right. He was off over in this nice country estate where every single need was met. He doesn't see people starving to death in the streets. He doesn't see how bad things are. So they think he just doesn't know. So if we move into the city, he'll have to see it. However, this is also sort of, the kind of the end for Louis. It's the beginning of the end because he's forced to be basically a prisoner for the next 3 years. He and his family are forbade to leave the city. They're not allowed to leave. And so, this brings this era of understanding that, hey, they were aiming for something closer to a limited monarchy, not completely turning everything on its head. However, as we're going to see, a lack of direction from anywhere is going to ultimately doom him and his family to execution. See, one of the things we have to understand about revolutions is this. The only time they really function well is when there's somebody who's in charge. Someone who is sort of the spiritual leader, not just a a political leader. You got to have somebody who people can really follow and believe in, that sort of thing. That person also has to do the right thing if it's going to be a true revolution. And you look at successful revolutions, you see these people in the place, these four places. French Revolution really doesn't have anybody. They get some people who kind of take the lead, but it's going to take a while before they get that to happen. So, again, we're going to see the situation. At first, that person they're hoping to get is Louis, but he doesn't step up. They hope that the General de Lafayette is going to do it. He's too old, and frankly, politically unsavvy for the task. So then they start looking other places. Eventually, there's going to be a guy named Maximilien Robespierre who's able to sort of capture the public attention, but as we're going to see, he doesn't last. His particular way of incentivizing people to obey authority is going to cause people to rebel. And so, really, we're left without a strong leader until Napoleon steps in to fill the gap. Who is politically shrewd, I might add. Now, another thing we have to understand that happens, I already showed you this picture, so I'm not worried about it, is the changes that are going to happen in terms of the church. You see, the French Catholic Church has a significant amount of power, both temporal and philosophical, psychological. And in order to keep the church in line, the National Assembly places the French Catholic Church under the control of the National Assembly. The problem with this, though, is this scene is meddling in the affairs of God, and so this causes a split to occur between the peasants and the middle class, because the peasants tend to be rather conservative. They support the church, and they're kind of classic in their way of thinking, and by doing this, they see it as an attack on faith, which causes them to sort of rebel against the revolution. So even though the first Constitution is written in 1791, it lacks quite a few principles that are eventually going to be added as things go on. So as things continue to go on, and as Louis continues to be a disappointment, people are voicing more and more of their frustration with the monarchy. And so he, afraid of what's going to happen, plans an escape. A group of friends help him break out of the palace and dress as commoners so that they can escape. Just leave the country entirely. I believe they were going to Germany, but I could be wrong. Anyhow, so they're in this carriage. Now let me ask you a question. If you were trying to escape the country, flee for your life, and you got a little bit hungry, how would you get food? How do you get something to eat? How do you eat like? Let's think. Could you go without? All right, you steal food. What's the problem with that? That someone might catch you, and then, now we know where you are. You got to kind of fly under the radar, don't you?
You gotta eat people.
Not eat people. I mean, there's plenty of ways you could do it, but you're going to have to be careful, yeah? No, you don't steal. Ideally, you have cash, and you buy something on the quick. Something that's non-traceable. If NCI hasn't told me anything. But let me put it this way. Louis' family, they get hungry, so they stop to eat. Now, how long does it take you to eat dinner?
I want 10 minutes.
That's a very good point. It really does depend on what you're having, doesn't it? Like, are we talking a formal, like, wedding dinner, or are we talking, like, McDonald's or something, So let's say a formal wedding dinner. There's plates and things like that. How long does that take? About an hour, maybe? Care to guess how long it takes a king to eat? About 3 hours, yeah. So he and his family sit down and order a meal that's going to last 3 hours. And then he goes to pay. What's on every single dollar bill in England? The face of?
Or PL.
Yeah, in this case, it's his face. In England, of course, it's Queen Elizabeth. But anytime you have a monarch, the monarch's face is directly on your currency. So he goes to pay, and the waiter's like, right back. And he's recognized. So his family's arrested and sent back to Paris, and now he's not brought back to people cheering. Like when the women forced him to come back, they were like, yeah, the king's here, he's going to fix everything. Woo! He's going, yeah, okay. This time, he's mocked. People are throwing things at him, things like that. How dare he leave? And it's not just a matter of abandonment. Like, certainly they're saying he's abandoning us. But the other thing is whenever you go flee a country like that, you go flee where you can raise support for yourself to raise an army to go take back the throne. He's not only abandoning us, he's a traitor. He's a traitor to France. And we know what happens to traitors, right? Yeah. In fact, beheading's an interesting thing because beheading is actually the execution form reserved for nobles. You know, commoners don't get their heads chopped off, they get hung. Hanging is reserved for the lowborn. Highborns are beheaded, you know, very stylistic sort of way. So one of the ideals of the French Revolution is equality for everyone. Everyone gets to be beheaded. Aren't we lucky? You know, but the thing is, beheading is a delicate art form. And you've got to imagine a neck, you know, it's about like the size of the cone of death, you know? To properly behead someone, you've got to hit in that area right there, and that's not an easy task. So a group of doctors got together and were trying to figure out a more humane way of beheading somebody. And so they came up with a machine that was named after one of the doctors in question, named Dr. Guillotin, and gave rise to a mechanical beheading machine called the guillotine, which was an interesting device in and of itself because it basically does the job of a professional headsman. So basically the way it works is you start with something to restrain the person's neck so that they can't scrunch it up and make a harder target, because the other thing is the muscles then bunch up, it's harder to cut through. So they make a little restraining device, a little collar, a piece of wood shaped like so. And then they build a frame so that, you know, this part can slide up and down and lock in place. Then they have a pulley that's got a rope attached to it, like so. And then they have a weight, and they put a blade on it. The thing is, the first blade shape is like an axe blade. It's kind of crescent shape. The problem, though, is that all of the force is right there on the edge. So it basically just like crushes the neck, you know, and that doesn't really do a good job. So they kind of worked around and said, well, let's make it like, you know, a knife, you know, or something. Make it square. And make this really sharp, so like a razor blade, you know. But again, the problem with this, have you guys ever eaten steak before? You take a knife and just try to cut it. You know, it doesn't work, does it? Just try to push through the meat. I mean, you can do it, but it's not really effective, is it? How do you cut steak? Yeah, you slice it, yeah? So they designed something, this sort of triangular shape, that as this presses on the head, it's like a slicing motion. So it slices the head off. Genius, right? And the other thing is it's not a guy doing the beheading, it's a machine. So it's totally, you know, totally humane, right? It happens, you don't even have to feel threat. So this is great. Science has progressed, you know. Of course, you know, it's still pretty horrible having your head chopped off, you know. I mean, I don't think any of us would say, like, that's totally humane. You know what I mean? But if you think about it, it's no different than any other form of execution, really. The result is kind of the same regardless. It's one's prettier than the other, but ultimately it's the same sort of thing, you know? So what's going to happen is more and more we're going to see the radicalization of the revolutionaries. Now, do you guys understand what I mean when I say radicalize? What a radical is? Or an extremist? Does that make any sense to you? When I say someone's an extremist, what am I saying about it? Yeah.
You're saying that whatever they believe in to the extreme.
Perfect, yeah, absolutely. So somebody who is an extremist can be conservative, liberal, autocratic, anything. It just means that they really go one direction. They're not very centered in terms of their beliefs. And extremists tend to be doing things that are on the outskirts, like they're so extreme in their views that we would be looking at really funny. So, for instance, somebody who is pro-life, we would say, okay, that's just someone who's pro-life, no big whoop. Someone who goes and kills abortion doctors and bombs out abortion clinics, things like that, we would say is an extremist, yes. The same thing goes the other way. Somebody who is like, you know, well, I kind of like to see more socialized medical reform. So, like, you know, we have like socialized medicine or something like that. They would be, okay, they're liberal. But somebody who is like, I want the government to be overthrown so we can have a socialist system or like a communist system, they would be extreme, you know? So this is the difference between extremist groups, you know? It's all a spectrum, is what I'm getting at. Is where you fit things where extremists are on the outside of the spokes. So we're going to see it more and more they go on the outside. You know, it's not just, you're not just a revolutionary, you've got to be like the revolutionary. Everything's revolution all the time. Or else, you know, you're not really a revolutionary. You're really not patriotic enough. You know, you're not a true Frenchman, that sort of thing. Which actually, by the way, is a fallacy of logic. I want to talk to you guys much about fallacies of logic. Okay. This is something that's very important whenever you're trying to convince someone of something. Whenever you're arguing, debating something, you have to be logical to convince them. People operate with logic. They also operate with emotion and things like that, but when you get right down to it, those are weak arguments for things. You know what I'm saying? Like saying, you know, you should, you know, saying that you should vote a certain way because real Americans vote this way, that's a fallacy of logic. Because it's saying that the only way you can really be an American is if you agree with me. Now, it doesn't matter whatever I say before that, it's wrong. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm marginalizing everything else. Everything else doesn't matter. You have to agree with this, or else you're not an American. It's illogical. Same sort of thing as think of the children. That's literally a think of the children logical fallacy, is what it's called. You know, or an appeal to morality. You know, only like if you believe this, you know, then you're a good person. If you don't, then you're an evil person. Things like that. There's all sorts of logical fallacies that when you know them, you look at people whenever they argue and they appeal to them all the time. False causations. One of my favorites, you see, I think parents do this a lot, honestly. Well, your real problem is this. You know, they're restating every problem you might have with one thing. Guys, there's never one cause of anything in this world. There's not one reason why you had what you had for breakfast, much less something that's a complex dilemma. You know what I'm saying? It's illogical to have someone try to boil it down to one issue and try to solve that issue. Magically, all your problems go away. That's not how it works. But we like to do that as a form of arguing. But if you call someone out on it, then you realize that they're not arguing correctly. Anyways, I'm going to teach you guys logical fallacies today. Suffice it to say, extremism, not logical. So we're going to see this time and time again. But anyhow, this radicalization and the violence that comes with it starts to really make the other countries of Europe nervous. Because they see, hey, if France can revolt, and France can go through this process, what's to stop it from happening in my country? And so they start warning France, better keep your business to yourself. Austria and Prussia go further and start making threats against the National Assembly. This is going to lead to war. In fact, you actually have a whole group of people fleeing France, members of the First and Second Estate fleeing the violence, who are going and telling horror stories in places like Germany and England and how bad things are back in France. The revolution's terrible. Here's an example of a pamphlet that was being spread by emigres as they were fleeing France. Now, what do you see in this picture here? What's that? I didn't hear you, sorry. Right, you definitely see the guillotine, sure. And if you look at it, it's dripping blood. So, yeah, I'd say they definitely beheaded someone, though you don't see a body. Although, look at where the head would have fallen. What do you see down here at the bottom? Yeah, some crowns, and the bishop's hat, and all these different things. So members of the church and the nobility, they're all the old world systems of power have been destroyed. We have these two characters, and you see what they're stepping on? It's not a newspaper. It's the law and the Bible.
Oh, no.
Now look at what's in their hands here. What's in the guy's hands? Bloody knife and drying. It's booze. Same thing here. What's up with his neck? You see that? Yeah, he was hung. You got it. You can see the noose around his neck, and actually a euphemism for hanging someone is giving him a neck stretching. If you see what's in their pockets, they've got money dripping out of their pockets. So are the revolutionaries really about freedom and rights? No, they're stepping on the law. They're stepping on God. They're just in it for the money, and they just want to party, and they want to watch the world burn. This is discrediting the revolutionaries by mudslinging. Now, to some extent, they're right. There is going to be a lot of problems that come out of the revolution, even though it starts with the very best of intentions. We're going to see some major problems come out of the French Revolution. We're also going to see some major victories as well. So to discredit them, say that it was all just bad all the time, it's not really accurate. However, we'll say this. It is going to be one of the bloodiest revolutions in history. This is the last slide for this section. So we got a couple different groups that are fighting for control of the revolution. The first, the Jacobins. The second are Sans-Culottes. Jacobins tend to be middle class. The Sans-Culottes tend to be working class. The working class want to see a republic put in place. Freedom for all men. We want to see change in the way the system's been set up. The Jacobins, they really kind of are aiming more for an oligarchy. They want to set up a system with an elite group, namely themselves. And ostensibly, it is a system based on meritocracy. The most capable succeed. However, the problem with that is what determines success? Is the amount of money you have, things like that. Because if it's the amount of money you have, well, if you're born into a family that's got a ton of money, that's kind of an advantage to being successful, isn't it? So does that mean only those people should have rights and freedoms and privileges? I don't think so. Even so, the radicals do gain control of the National Assembly, and they're going to declare war basically on everybody else in Europe. They're going to fight wars up until 1850. So there's going to be some pretty big changes going on in Europe. That's going to result in some pretty big chaos. Savvy? Any questions on this section? Because this is phase 1. French Revolution. Good. Phase 1. So next we're moving on to section 2. phase 2. Why don't you guys finish writing that?
What is that, this little machine thingy called?
Guillotine. Guillotine. You good on this? Move on to the next section? Fantastic. Where'd my mouse go? There it is. No. Oh. So, phase 2. I'm going to skip these terms because they actually are not correct. I say bless you. I was like, wait, that's to myself. That's a little weird.
You don't know what chapter or section?
2. Section
Chapter or section? Does that show you which chapter?
So, one of the things we're going to see in the early 1790s is that France is losing its force with the rest of Europe. So people are frustrated. Military losses are embarrassing. So they want to get their frustrations out. So a mob forms and attacks the king's palace, killing all the guards and placing the king under arrest for basically no reason, really. Then they march to a prison that's holding political prisoners, mostly members of the First and Second Estate, and massacre everyone in the cells. Kill everyone. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I wouldn't suggest having it plugged in back there. So this leads to what's known as the September Massacres. Again, it seems hard to believe that people would just form a mob and let's go murder a bunch of people. Sounds good. But this is something that, you know, we have seen both in history and also in fiction. You guys, I'm sure, have seen reference to The Purge. Everything is now legal, so go on a murdering spree. Hooray! You know, people are like, will people really go do that? The answer is, yeah, they have. Maybe not the one day, maybe not just because they feel like it, but if there's one group of people that are persecuted in a country and their violence against them is sort of encouraged, if not outright banned, just kind of wink at them about it, yeah, absolutely this happens. It's called Nazi Germany. It happens all over the world. It's still happening today. You guys know ISIS? Killing Christians? You guys know that there's a document where Muhammad has said flat out, Muslims are not allowed to kill Christians. In fact, they're supposed to help them, treat them like a little brother. How many guys are aware that document existed? Yeah, it totally is a thing. In fact, in the Quran, it states that Christians and Jews are to be protected by Muslims because they're basically brothers. There should never be a war between those peoples. It happens anyways. Proper hateful rhetoric will get people to do just about any kind of horrible thing you can imagine. Case in point. There is no government. There's no restrictions on what you can and cannot do. They just go out, abuse them, kick them, and they don't intend, like, it's not like they set out in the mob like, we're going to go kill a bunch of people. It starts off, we're going to go yell at them, and you get angrier and more frustrated and like just lose control. You don't think about it, just violence. That's the disquieting thing. It's not that only certain people will engage in violent activities. So you never know when violence is going to come out in the worst circumstances. Clearly, movies and books and music are what make people violent. You know, that romantic music, that Rococo and Baroque, man, edgy stuff. Making people go out and murder nobles. That's a joke. That doesn't actually happen. Never mind. It's not funny. Never say that again. Anyways, so the National Assembly has remade the National Convention. We have a new government, and suffrage is expanded to all males. Now, this is a big deal. Women are going to have a long, hard battle to get the rights and privileges that they are going to still be fighting for, honestly. But men don't even have the right to vote. Heck, in the United States, all men didn't have the right to vote at this time. So doing it in France, kind of a big deal. Things are going to change because of it. But for now, Louis and his wife are going to be put on trial, found guilty of treason, they're going to be executed by guillotine. This is a message to every other monarch in Europe. Who really has the power? The people. And that's going to be one of the big fears that spreads to these other nations, is maybe their people are going to try to overthrow them and form their own country. And maybe they too will face a guillotine. So there's going to be a lot of problems. We will see. Any questions on any of this? How's it coming, you guys? Do what? Okay. Good story, bro. Alright, let's talk Louis' execution. So, one thing you have to understand is that a king was supposed to have a certain poise regardless of whatever situation he was in. So, when it came to the execution, you can imagine what people would be like when they're being executed. Fearful, any number of different things. Louis is brave. He has this face of legality to him. he has this sense of owning, like almost like this scaffold that's been erected to execute him as like a stage, where he's going to direct his speech to the crowd. So even though he wasn't the best of king, he certainly dies like a king. Marie Antoinette does the same thing. She dies with grace and poise, and everyone's applauding, things like that. It's part of this almost performance, a ritual, if you will, where they're led first to a cart where they're driven to the scaffold in the center of town amongst a crowd of onlookers, and they're cheering and jeering, and some are, Your Majesty, and some are this and that, and there's this whole mess of different reactions to her and him. And then when they take the stage, they're presented to the crowd, and they're allowed to have a speech where Louis derides the crowd. How dare they execute their monarch, and they shall see that history shall prove that they did the wrong thing, and all this sorts of stuff. And then when he's finished, he marches himself over to the guillotine. The blade drops. In the case of Louis, it wasn't quite sharp enough to make it all the way through his neck. So they had to drop it again. The second time didn't work either. So they had to get two guys to jump up on top of the blade to finish the cut. Kind of a botched thing, but he goes through with flying colors, head drops into a basket, where it is then risen up and presented to the crowd. Now, interestingly enough, there was a noblewoman, or rather an artisan, who worked with nobles, specifically in the casting of wax faces, nobles' faces, that they could be made into pieces of art and things like that. And the revolutionaries got a hold of this lady and threatened to kill her, and so she agreed to save her own life to make wax faces of the leaders of the revolution, including the death masks of Marie Antoinette in Louis XVI. She later escaped France, moved to England, where in London she opened up a workshop basically to continue making these wax figures, and her name is Madame Tussaud. That shop is still in London, and you can go there and see where they still make wax statues that are fairly lifelike of many different pop cultural figures, popes, kings and queens, movie stars, all kinds of folks. And the death masks, I believe, of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI are still there in the museum. Yeah, Madame Tussauds wax masks. After they were killed, their faces were made into a mask to preserve, because no matter what you do, the head's going to decompose. That way you can see the face. So, it's just an interesting bit of history. So in the early 1793, France was in a state of crisis for three main reasons. One, their economy's tanked. There's a lot of starvation. Two, peasant revolts. Basically, the peasants are upset not only are things not getting fixed, but also with a lack of progress, because the peasants aren't like being free, given land, all sorts of stuff. They are in desperate need of change. Thirdly, France is at war with most of Europe, and they're losing. So, in order to try to combat this, a new system is established. We have another council put together that replaces the old government. So that's what, 4 governments are on now so far in this chapter? Called the Committee of Public Safety. It's headed by 12 individuals, and sort of the leader of that comes out is a dude named Maximilian Robes, who we have today. However, one major change allows France to start changing its fate in the wars it's fighting. And that is, it changes laws so that all citizens are going to be involved in the war effort. This is a concept called total war. Total war. Every man, woman, and child in the country is involved in the war effort. Men fight, women create supplies. They actually are the ones working behind, building weapons, ammunition. Even children can be used to make weapons and things like that. Now consider this for just a second, if you will. What percentage of the U.S. population would you say is in the Army? Well, let me rephrase that. In the armed forces, Army, Navy, Marines, the whole shebang. What percent of our population do you think is in the armed forces? 25, you say? 35, start. Any other guesses? 16. 27. Anything else? I know the answer because I did the calculations this morning. 0.0003%. Now, to put that in top strength of military might, we do spend a lot of money on our military, around, I think it's 32% of GDP. Consider this. What would happen if I took that 0.003% and raised it to 50%? Or 100%? Well, if we stopped making stuff and just started making bombs and tanks and planes and guns and everything, and be the most powerful army we could possibly make, what could we do with it? Take over the world. Let's talk navies for just a second. Let's take the U.S. Navy in microcosm. Let's just say aircraft carriers. We have about, I think, 22, 25 aircraft carriers in the world. United States, here world round. If you take the armies, or excuse me, the navies of every other nation on Earth and combine them, they're about a quarter of that size. So to put it in perspective, we have 4 times more aircraft carriers than all the other nations of the world combined. That's how much power we have in terms of projecting force. And we spend how much money? Only less than a quarter. How many people do we have? Less than 1%. How much more power can we bring to bear if we go to total war? You see what I'm saying? See where I'm going with this? When France does this, they immediately have an advantage. And they're going to start defeating Europe. That's a monumental feat. They nearly conquer all of Europe. There's really only a few holdouts that are able to avoid this major disaster, really. That's going to be England and Russia. Russia's too big and too cold. And England's an island. But, as we're going to see, they're going to try anyways. Total war. Any questions? That's it for today, guys. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. You guys get to the rest. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Alrighty.